Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Online Smicha. Today we'll discuss the halacha in this week's Parsha, Parshat Ki Tavo. As we are preparing closer and closer to the Yom Adin, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there's a tremendous lesson that we can learn from this week's Parsha. As we all know, especially how it's elaborated in Chassidish Sfarim, that in Ki Tavo, even though it seems to be a lot of harsh words, yet there is somewhere hidden in every one of these harsh words a bracha. But there's a lesson, and perhaps a halachic lesson that you can learn from the way the Torah describes some of the negativity that chas v'sholom might take place. There are two psukim in this week's parsha where there is a kri and a ksiv. The Torah writes it one way, yet the Baal Koreh, when he reads it in the Torah, will read it differently. And they're both in Parshat Ki Tavo. In Perek Chav Ches, Pasik Chav Zayin, it says, God forbid, Yakcha Hashem b'Shchin Mitzrayim, the Eibishter will punish with one type of sickness, Shchin Mitzrayim, and it says, Ube'afoilim. Yet, we don't read it ba'afoilim, you read it Ube'tchoirim. Further on, 3 psukim later, the pasuk says, God forbid, Isha ta'ares, somebody will engage a wife, a woman to be a wife. The ish achar yishgaleno. Now that's how it's written. Yet the kri is yishkavena. And the question is, why the change? And what's the reason? What's the lesson that we can learn from this change? So the Gemara says in Megillah, Tana Rabbanan, Kala mikroi saksuvim b'Torah l'gnai. Anything that the Torah says and it's described in a word that is a gnai, an embarrassing, not 100% clean. Koydin oisay l'shevach. When you read it barabim, you change it from the ksiv to a kri. Kegoin, from yishgeleno you say yishkaveno. Ba'afoilim you say batchoirim. And the Gemara lists off a couple of more instances where you change the kri from the ksiv. The Maharsha makes a point, and the Maharsha explains that this only applies in things that are public reading, either Torah shebiksav, where there's kriyas Torah barabim, or Nevi'im, where there's haftorah. But if you find a pasuk in Tehillim, which an example the Maharsha brings, which you perhaps could find a cleaner word to use, being that it's not said barabim, there is no concept of kri and ksiv. There's actually a shtickle debate between the Rambam and the Ramban here. Are these words perhaps gnai, or is it just a lack of edel, a little less edel, to make it more edel we change the word, or is it really too harsh of a word? There's a debate as it's brought in the Sfarim between the Rambam and the Ramban. L'payel, this halacha, this concept that a person should use clean language, we spoke about it a couple of times during the Shiurim, and in Parshas Noach we have the famous rule, because we find the Torah goes out of its way to add extra words to describe something in a cleaner manner. But especially when you're talking about Rahman al-Atlan in the Yonim of Klolis, you have to be very, very careful what you say. And the Alter Rebbe brings this in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Shmiras Haguf HaNefesh, that bris krusel is fasayim, that every time somebody says something, it comes out of his mouth, some effect it has. So a person has to be very, very careful what comes out of his mouth and how it comes out of his mouth. So, for example, it's brought in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, and the Kaf HaChaim brings it, that when a person is saying Nebuch a tragic story, he should always add lo yaleichem. This and this happened, but lo yaleichem, the story should not affect you. It shouldn't chas v'sholom happen by you too. There are other examples that are brought in different Sifrei Achronim that perhaps it's interesting to quote. In a Sefer Tomer Devorah, he brings from the Menahage, from the Chassam Sofer. So he says, for example, when somebody heard that mother was calling the child, come lamata, come down, lamata, he wasn't too pleased because come down, lamata didn't have a nice ring to it. So he asked to change the way it's described. You know that the Chazal B'chlal are makpid, that always to be Messiahim, conclude a chapter, conclude a speech with a davar toiv, to start off with a positive note and finish off with a positive note. It is brought that the Chassam Sofer wasn't too pleased, especially this time of the year, when a person would say, have a gemar toiv. What does a gemar toiv means? Have a good finish. Finish, that means it's done. He didn't like that. He actually insisted that you should say, have a gemar chasima toiva. Have a good sealing. So referring to not the toiv, you're done, it's gemar, it's over. But the chasima should be a gemar toiv. In Kava Yashar, it is brought that a lady once was talking with her friends, and she said, after 120 years old, when I will be asked different questions, why I did so, I won't have a problem. I will make myself Rahman al-Islam like I'm deaf, or like a mute, I can't talk, and by that I will avoid the situation. So in Kava Yashir it is brought, she said it passably as a joke amongst people, and not too long passed, and Nebuch, she actually became sick. She became a mute, a deaf person. So a person always has to be very careful in what he says and how he says it. The Torah shows it to us in so many ways. The Torah wants here, even when Nebuch it's speaking about negative things, he finds mitzayden henchikis, how to say it in a pleasant way. So we should all take this lesson in our behavior, and we should all have a ksiva v'chasima toiva, a gemar chasima toiva, an ach toiva l'chol Yisrael. Kol tov. Please join us again next week.